Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's 2020 Annual Legislative Conference Emerging Leaders Series Mentor Match Insights panel. Today, we're going to be talking about refining what it means to be a young professional in the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recession, and Black Lives Matter movement. I'm Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, and I'm honored to represent the 14th District in Illinois in the House of Representatives. I'm a CBCF alum. I did the internship in the summer of 2006, and I am the youngest Black woman to ever serve in the United States Congress. And so it's my honor to be able to open up this panel today. You know, this is a really challenging time across the country. So many of us are living in communities that are battling a joint healthcare crisis and economic crisis brought on by COVID-19. I graduated from college in the summer of 2008. And so when we talk about a recession, this is my second in my career. And so I understand a little bit what it means to talk about anxiety, uncertainty, and looking for a mentor, a sponsor, or someone to help along early in our careers in navigating these challenging times of an economic recession. I want you all to take the opportunity to learn from today's experts that have gathered today, because they know exactly what to do because they've been in your shoes before. I'm thrilled that the foundation has such dynamic, important content as part of our first virtual conference, and I hope you all take the opportunity to continue to watch these workshops throughout the course of the next several weeks. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me in my office or any of the other members of the Congressional Black Caucus if we can serve you or your families during this time. We invite you to visit cbcfinc.org for more information, and thank you again. With that, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Jamal Simmons, the principal at the Raven Group.
Hey, Congresswoman, thank you so much for that great introduction. I appreciate you being here. I know you gotta run, but I know everyone here appreciates your words and your example and your rise from a CVCF, fellow intern up to Congress and being a member is something that I think probably inspires the entire generation behind you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jackson, Vice President of Environment, Policy, and Social Initiatives at Apple. It's great to be with you today, even if the CBC conference looks a bit different than we're used to. But you're here. You showed up because you recognize the importance of connection. You're pursuing the opportunity to meet with leaders and peers around the issues that matter most to our professions and to our country. And you know that we are in a moment where showing up and using our voices matters like never before. Many of you are at the start of your careers, and I hope you're excited for the amazing lineup that you'll hear from during today's panel. These leaders represent not only excellence in their fields, but the tremendous importance of seeing Black representation in the seats of power in some of our country's largest companies and organizations. Today, they will share key learnings to help guide your career journey. But I believe their most important contribution is simply being here. Because we know that representation is one of the most important catalysts for creating a more inclusive workforce. As a young girl, I grew up wanting to be a doctor. Because my pediatrician was a woman, it never occurred to me that there were people who didn't believe that I could become one too. And when I made the choice to become an engineer instead, it was because I had the opportunity to be exposed to the field of engineering and the potential careers available to me because of that exposure. So I encourage you to approach this week with curiosity and courage. Attend sessions you may not have otherwise considered. Ask questions. Reach out to those who inspire you. But there's one other important tool I hope you have in your toolbox: confidence. There is much to learn, but you also bring so much to this conference. Your generation has proven time and time again the ability to push for swift and needed change. You are standing on the literal front lines of the battle for racial equality, and you're demanding more from leaders, organizations, and businesses. Keep fighting. At Apple, we recognize that we have an important opportunity and responsibility to further our efforts to advance justice. It's why we launched our new Racial Equity and Justice Initiative, channeling our resources and our platforms to push for educational advancement, criminal justice reform, and economic empowerment. And it's why we're working every day to ensure our company reflects the broad and diverse customers we serve. We're honored to support today's event and so inspired by all of you emerging leaders. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
All right, everybody, welcome. We are here to have a conversation about being mentors, how to find one, how to be one, and how to make sure that you're getting the most out of your relationship with your mentor. I've got a really great panel that's here. You guys can take a look at their full bios. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to each one of them. And then panelists, as you talk, if you want to tell us something about your background that you think the people who are watching this ought to know, please feel free to do that. So I'm going to start off, just introduce everybody all together. Aisha Bowe is the founder and CEO of STEMboard. Thank you for being here. Chloe Barze is the managing director at Accenture. Shaka Burgess is managing partner at Empire Consulting Group. Monica Howard Douglas is the general counsel at Coca-Cola North America. And Sherry Wilson is director of federal and administration affairs at one of the biggest companies in my hometown, General Motors. So I want to thank all of you all for being here. I think we're going to start off the conversation with Aisha Bowe. I think Aisha has some really compelling things to talk about and maybe even a little presentation.
Thank you, Jamal, and absolutely excited to be here with everybody today. And one of the things that really impacted me, as the Congresswoman said, was 2008. I graduated in that time, and let me tell you, I started my degree in aerospace engineering at the University of Michigan with pre-algebra in a community college. I was never somebody who thought that they would go to college, let alone have a career at a federal agency like NASA, and mentorship was key to me along this journey. From seeking out and actively finding advocates that could tell me how to navigate the corporate environment, to making lasting relationships with people as part of professional societies. I leveraged my exposure to STEM to continually find ways to grow beyond what it was that I had been taught traditionally in the classroom. And so I couldn't be any more excited to be part of this panel and talk a little bit more about some of the techniques and tips that I received along the way to not only transition from actively practicing as an engineer, but applying that same type of ingenuity to growing my own company, of which I've had now for the last 7 years, and that is operated in the defense market.
Excuse me, back. Let's hear next from Shaka Burgess. I think Shaka's there.
I'm here. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to Jamal for moderating. Thanks to the staff at CBC Foundation for pulling us together. For those of you who might be wondering, this little strap on my shoulder is not me trying to be fashionable. I had shoulder surgery and I'm still recovering, so forgive me for that. Listen, I serve a few different roles. Jamal talked about the role that I serve in my professional career as managing partner for Empire Consulting Group. We represent a number of companies, but I also serve as the chair of the Corporate Advisory Council for the CBC Foundation. I know that this time of year would usually be spent networking during the annual legislative conference, and we've had to move to a virtual version of that. So I'm glad we've been able to explore these types of opportunities to continue these conversations. I've done the mentor match programs in person previously and know how meaningful those discussions can be. My career path in Washington has been one exploring government relations as a profession. I came to Washington to attend Howard University specifically because I wanted to be in the nation's capital, and I wanted to attend an HBCU, and what better opportunity than Howard to do that. But then decided to stay here and have explored careers in all different facets of government affairs or government relations. I've worked at government agencies. I've worked for not-for-profits. I've worked for companies, and now run my own consulting firm. So I know how meaningful relationships can be. A lot of the folks who are on this Zoom with me are people who I've gotten to know during my time and tenure in Washington, D.C., including my board colleague, Aisha Bowe, and Cherie Wilson, who serves on the Corporate Advisory Council. Jamal and I go way, way back, so we're not even gonna talk about that. But listen, there's an art and science to building the relationships necessary, and this COVID period does disrupt that. But I will say that your generation is far better equipped than most to be able to navigate this space and utilize some constructive tools and opportunities to continue to do your networking, to continue to grow as professionals, and to continue to be able to tap into folks like us here and others beyond us to continue to build your career path. And so I'm excited about being here and looking forward to the dialogue.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chaka. Next up is Monica Howard Douglas.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. I think I would call myself a lifelong mentee as well as a mentor now. I have a lot of passion about this space, and as much as I think I credit as much as my success to my hard work as I do to the many mentors and sponsors that I have had along the way. In my career, mentors not only helped shape the direction of my career, but they've also helped show me how to open doors and go after opportunities. When I decided to go to law school, I really thought I was going to end up as a public interest attorney, focusing on helping those in the criminal justice system. And so I went off to Stanford Law School, and I was in an environment where there were only 8 African Americans in my first year class. When you go to law school, one of the first things you do is start looking for a job. They're preparing you for that competitive summer clerkships. And so I set about attending all of the workshops. I went to all the formal sessions. But I can say to you, the reason I got my first and second year clerkships were due to mentors, people I developed relationships who pulled me aside and told me ways to open doors. One piece of advice that would be relevant to today is that a third year African-American student said, you're never gonna get the job by going through the routes that everyone else is going through. Find those connections. Call every African-American partner at the law firms that you're interested in. Find out those who might have gone to the same undergrads as you, those that might be in the same sorority as you, those who might be from the same city as you. Find a common connection. Send them an email, let them know you want to have coffee or talk over the phone, and make that connection and then talk after you develop the relationship, see where it might take you. And I did just that and got my first year job at a major law firm in Chicago and one in Atlanta my first summer. I think there are a lot of different types of mentoring relationships, but the most important part is that they are relationships. It's so important that you expand your circles wherever you are and wherever you're trying to go. I think I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that during this part of your life and your career where you're getting started, mentorship is important, but you ultimately also need sponsors. And those are the people who will advocate for you and speak up for you. And those relationships need to be intentional. Now, as I serve as a mentor to many across many different functions and amongst many different circles, I will tell you the most successful relationships that I have are those where it's a two-way street, where I'm giving and receiving as much advice as the person is on the other end, where we're getting to know each other, where I'm figuring out and realizing how I might help and aid in the success of my mentee, or what I might gain from the relationship as well. So put the work in on the front end. I think during this crisis, there's more opportunity to connect. It almost makes it less awkward to ping someone and ask for a moment of their time now that we're all sitting behind computers and connecting through video. I think that this is something that in time will become easier, but it's a necessary part of your career and your success.
Thank you, Monica. That was very helpful. Next, we are going to hear from Chloe Barze.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a managing director with Accenture, and I'm responsible for one of our large strategic global accounts. And I'm also the managing director for our office here in Atlanta, which is where I am today. And it's our 7th largest office in our footprint in North America, and also our most diverse office. And I'd say I never thought that I would be here. I grew up in Harlem, and very much like Aisha, I wasn't sure what my career path would be, but I knew that I wanted to make sure I had a job when I got out of school. And so for me, STEM became very important. We call it STEM now. At the time, it was a math professor that said, if you can, figure this out, you can likely get a job in engineering. And I knew that out of all of my peers, if I could get a job when I graduated, then at least I had a path going forward. And that was so important to me. And I ended up, really focusing on math and getting better at it and better. And so then I ended up majoring in engineering in college because I was focused on making sure I could get a job when I got out. What I would say in terms of the importance of mentoring, I'd say one of the most important mentors that I've had in my life was a guy named Harvey Coleman. And he wrote this book. It's called Empowering Yourself. And it really talks about the unwritten rules of the game. And he talks about, the key things that are important for success. One is performance. You just can't get past that. That's like the baseline to stay in the game. And then the second is really exposure and image. The second is image. It's how you show up. So do you have a positive attitude? Are you willing to do the things that it takes to succeed? When you get knocked down and when you fail, are you willing to stand back up again and keep going? And that's so important because, in life, you're going to have ups and downs. No one's career is ever perfect all the time. And it's important to be able to know that if you fail, if you can get back up again, you'll be okay. And then the last is exposure. And that's really the importance of mentors and sponsors and having people understand what's important to you. You would be surprised that I was surprised, I would say, that just by telling people what I wanted to do, how many people were willing to support me in my career. And so I would credit Harvey Coleman for giving me those tips, but those are also in a book that he wrote. And I can tell you lots of stories, as you have questions about how I've applied those tips.
All right, Cherie Wilson, thank you very much, Chloe. Cherie Wilson, you are our cleanup batter.
Thank you. So I took a bit of a different approach with a presentation. I really wanted to kind of showcase some of the tools in my toolkit for all of you to be able to leverage. In my current role, I'm a Director of Federal and Administration Affairs for General Motors, the #1 automaker in the US. I started my career as a CBCF summer intern, working for my hometown member of Congress, Albert Arwin, who hired me for a full-time role right out of college. It is in this context that I look forward to sharing some of my thoughts and tips on how to not only survive, but thrive during these difficult times as a young Black professional. I cannot underscore the importance of building out your own informal personal board of directors, or your A-team, similar to how companies leverage their board members for strategic counsel to mitigate risk, maximize opportunities, and identify blind spots. As rising leaders, you need this type of support in your own personal toolkit to be successful. Leveraging individuals who are invested in your professional development and success is essential as you chart your path forward. Not only are you judged by the company you keep, but in many ways, your level of success is directly correlated to the people you associate with. Therefore, it is critical that you seek counsel from and surround yourself with people who inspire you and who you aspire to emulate. This is particularly pertinent now during the pandemic, where we are social distancing. If you are virtually connecting with negative people, they will bring you down mentally and physically during these difficult times. Just as we encourage companies to prioritize diversity on their board of directors and in the C-suite, you too should have a diverse cast of characters for support and insights. If your circle lacks diversity, you will miss opportunities and perspectives that could mean the difference between a promotion or a demotion, for example. And by diversity, I mean all forms. For example, you should have people with different political views and ideologies and with different political, in addition to various demographic differences. One point that I also want to emphasize is that, and I think we've heard this echoed from the other speakers, is that mentorship alone will not catapult you to your next leadership role. As this slide notes, there are also advocates, sponsors, and role models, in addition to mentors, that you should include on your board of directors. An important distinction I wanted to share is that sponsors and advocates, for example, are those who speak up on your behalf and behind closed doors, make sure that your name is considered for opportunities. Advocates can be at any level within a company or within your network, and they just need to have access to decision makers to be impactful. Whereas sponsors are senior leaders within your company or organization who are strategically invested in your success. These are the senior leaders who are getting you placed into leadership development programs and who are championing opportunities for you to move upwards within your organization. This slide really tries to draw the distinction between the mentor-sponsorship relationship and the important purpose they each serve as you navigate an organization. An important aspect of mentorship and sponsorship that I'd like to highlight here is that mentors help you navigate the unwritten rules for advancement in an organization. In other words, they typically know and share with you where the bodies are buried within an organization, so to speak, and they know where the landmines are that you should avoid at all costs and give you the helpful tricks of the trade. Where sponsors also have this knowledge, but they have the ability to position you to actively participate in key work streams and experiences that will enable your advancement. So who is on your board? This slide just provides a bit of insights into the types of people and the perspectives that you want to include on your informal board of directors, such as a key connector who can help you build your network, or a comptroller who can ensure you remain accountable to your professional goals and milestones. Over the course of my career, I have come in contact with all of these types of individuals, and I'm still building out my board of directors, frankly. In fact, I am learning that you may have multiple boards of directors depending on what your goals and individual needs may be. But having a strong lineup is critical, and I'll give you an example. One of my references for my current job was a longtime mentor who knew the hiring manager extremely well. The hiring manager knew me, but did not know enough about my lobbying experience to make an automatic decision in the absence of my mentor's recommendation. Hearing from my mentor placed my candidacy at the top because a mentor was someone in the hiring manager's respected and valued network. In this vein, my mentor took on an advocate role that opened up a door for me in my professional career. The hiring manager then became a sponsor for me by creating opportunities for my professional development, such as inclusion and leadership development programs, and entrusting me with additional responsibilities that aligned with my passions and interests. And so networking, obviously this is a major part of how we can build out our board of directors. And COVID-19 has changed the nature of how we do business, especially here in Washington, where in any given evening, you can end up in a social networking experience or a happy hour. However, because of COVID-19 and social distancing restrictions, all of this has really moved to virtual platforms, such as the one that we're on right now. And I would say, as a key strategy right now, leverage LinkedIn. It's an excellent resource and tool for social networking in a professional setting. And in fact, I didn't realize the value of this until I actually heard from seasoned HR professionals who were leveraging this. So I would highly recommend this as a resource for you to use. And then lastly, we are all on a journey, professional and personal, where we're aligning our vision and values or identifying our North Star. And as Black professionals in particular, we carry the weight and responsibilities of our ancestors on our shoulders and are constantly on guard or conscious of potential discrimination and bias in the workplace. In fact, Catalyst, a women's leadership development organization, has coined the phenomenon, the emotional tax. The current heightened interest in Black lives from corporate America has elevated consciousness from our white colleagues and counterparts. However, there's still so much work to do to help individuals relate to this dual consciousness that people of color experience. And it's a balancing act that we all have to continue to play around which issues we should advocate for internally and externally. In fact, I am still trying to figure out how to do that, as you really need to make sure that you're balancing your passions with what's right and fair. But nonetheless, I encourage you as young leaders to push the envelope, but lean in on your mentors, your advocates, your role models, and sponsors to make sure you are successful in how you advance change within your organization and externally. So thank you, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Cherie. And you know, I want to pick up kind of where you stopped off at, because it reminds me of one of my earliest mentors and somebody who became both a mentor and advocate, really was very helpful to me throughout my career, was a guy who I was sent to. He was presenting on behalf of our department when I worked in the government. And I was sent with him as a junior, literally probably my first 2 months of working. I was sent with him to go to this interview that he was going to go be featured in. And on the way back, he asked me how he did. And so I had this moment where I had to sort of wrestle with myself about, you know, well, what do I say here? Do I tell him the truth, or do I just tell him what I think he wants to hear? And so I told him the truth. I said, you know, I've heard you give interviews and talks before, and, you know, and usually when you talk, you say this thing. Today, you didn't say that, you said something else. I think your original answer is better than the one that I heard today. And, you know, we had a whole conversation about it. We get back to the office. He goes to his office. I go back to mine. My boss gets a phone call in 5 minutes. And she leaves. She comes back and she says, well, what did you say when you were away? And I said, well, I told her the story, what I said. And she said, well, whatever you said, he said he wants you to go with him to all his interviews because you're the only person around here not blowing smoke up his ass. So and he may be a rare person, but what it told me is an early lesson about leadership as well as about authenticity is that you know, people will say what they think about you. The question is whether or not they say it to your face or they say it behind your back. And in the leadership model that I've had in my career, I've tried to, when I've had people work for me, I've tried to create, and with my mentors and other folks, tried to create an environment where people felt some comfort in being able to give me bad news. Because I've watched people who don't like to get bad news, and over time, it doesn't really work out very well. So I want to ask the panel here, the group, how do you strike that balance between trying to be honest and authentic, and then also, you know, it's still work. So trying to be political and not getting sideways with the folks that you work with. I'll start with Chloe, because you also touched on some of this.
I agree with everything that you said, Jamal. It's about being authentic, because if you're not authentic, people can sense it. And so one of the things that I learned, which was an interesting lesson for me, is I always thought that, you know, I could have my work life and then my personal life. And I was, you know, two different people in these lives. And so, you know, I was cool at, you know, after work, and at work, I was just this stuffy professional person. And it wasn't until I brought the two pieces together that I began to really experience growth in my career, because people saw that I was being authentic and that I was keeping it real. And in keeping it real, people can tell me things and I can listen to their feedback in a real way. This goes back to, and it was said earlier, mentoring is important, but what's most important is developing those authentic relationships, as you said, so that you can have that real conversation. And through that, we all get better.
Thank you. Monica, you also kind of just started to get into this. You want to catch up here?
Sure. I mean, I second everything that Chloe just said. I think finding the confidence to be your authentic self is a true leadership competency that that we all need to work and strive towards. And I think self-awareness is the second piece of this. I think you need to know your environment, the culture that you're working in, and you do that by building relationship with those who've been there, longer than you. And once you can establish where you are, I then think you use the tools that you have to adapt to your situation. So my organization, for example, values truth tellers. They value that voice in the room that is going to, no matter what the circumstance, kind of tell you the way it really is. But there are some leaders who may have tissue rejection to that. And so I know who those leaders are, and I know that I have to come around the side door with them and have the side conversation first to make sure they're comfortable with what I'm going to say in the larger room. And those are tactics that you'll develop throughout your career. The baseline, though, is really, I think, understanding how to build the relationships to know where you're working and to become confident enough to be your true self in the situations that you're going to find yourself in. Jamal, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. This is like a Zoom skit. Shaka, you're like the most keeping it real person that I know who deals in corporate America. What is that relationship balance like for you, especially, as a Black man? And sometimes, listen, I think Black men and Black women have particularly different issues when we engage in mainstream society. But the line between being assertive and direct for a Black man and being angry is a really fine one. And sometimes your presence alone gets people uncomfortable. So how do you navigate the ability to kind of keep that authenticity?
It's a great question. The short version of the long answer is, I was raised to be comfortable in my skin. Those of us who have names like Jamal and Shaka and Aisha, you know what you're getting when we walk in the door.
Right.
I remember when I started a job with, I worked for Eli Lilly and Company. And when I came to work the first day, my boss made a point of asking me how I pronounced my name. And it was a big production about how I pronounced my name in my first staff meeting. And I said, look, everybody just breathe and take a second and get it out of your system. It's Shaka. It's not Shaka Khan. I gave him the etymology behind my name, why it is what it is, and we were able to all get along from there. But to your point, there are these stereotypes and preconceived notions oftentimes when you walk into a room that people want to be able to lean into. I enjoy that, frankly. I enjoy knowing that somebody is off their game because they are trying to process a 6-foot-something, 200-something pound Black man named Shaka standing in front of them, having an intelligent conversation about whatever the subject matter is. It's empowering for me to know that I actually have a leg up because I'm not unfamiliar with the corporate world. And so I leverage that to my advantage in those kinds of scenarios. Now, there's the fine line that you talk about, which is when keeping it real goes wrong, right? So you have to know, where that balance is. I believe that you should show up to work and be your 100% authentic self. Most corporate training exercises will tell you that that's what corporate that's what they're about. That's what our company's culture is about. But we all know at the end of the day that assimilation is the rule more so than true diversity.
Right.
And so it's understanding the rules of the game and being fully versed and fully cognizant of what the rules are so that you know when you're stepping on those fine lines. I think with a lot of young people, they don't understand, why their voice is not being heard the same way. And I think that some of it is because the generation that is coming up believes in being authentic and believes in being themselves, but don't understand the sweat equity that goes into who's in the room and why they're there. And so it's being able to understand the chain of command, how that fits within your organization. I think somebody talked about the fact that some people are just going to reject hearing things a certain way, and so you have to study. You have to truly take the time to study the sociology of your organization and understand the touch points, and then find those swim lanes that you can go into where you can be you.
I had and Aisha, I want to come to you next. I got a little bit of a twist on this. I had a professor when I was at Morehouse who his point was, you don't have to follow the rules, but you need to know the rules so that you know when you're breaking them.
Yes.
The worst thing to do is to be out here just breaking rules without any sensibility about, what you're up to. That's how
the way I like to say it is, you have to understand the rules of the game so that you can play the game well enough so that when you get to the point where you can change the rules of the game, you can play it the way that you want to.
Right. Aisha, engineering. Engineering, a lot of us here, we have government, legal, media backgrounds. Engineering is not a space where you hear about, and we hear a lot about not having enough people of color, not having women populated enough. How do you navigate that as a Black woman who's come up through this space and been successful? What was that journey like for you?
I think for me, and I'm over here clapping under the table to nearly everything Shaka had to say, because for me, it was really understanding when to lean into who I am and where I come from, and when to sit back and observe. I would say I spent the first half of my career, of the better part of 3 years, with mentors who were orthogonal in their career experience to my own, just so that I could learn the rules of the road, because I wanted to understand how they viewed the world so that I could understand how I could combat some of the things that they may have taken as truths. And so many of the mentors that were the most influential for me were many, many decades older than me. As you guys who worked in federal service know, there are quite a few graybeards around, and they're more than happy to tell you how they got there if you're willing to invest in sending a friendly email and showing some interest in their career. And you get into a lot of interesting conversations. And I had a lot of times when they would say, well, I've never worked with a young Black person, or I didn't know we had Black female rocket scientists in my building, or like all kinds of things that would come up. And I would just say, okay, I appreciate this because I really want to understand how you see the world. But then I really felt as though part of this, and what I love about what Shaka was saying, was once I understood that game, I could play the game, and I could work to try to play the game better than they played the game. And so I kept receipts, right? I made sure that anytime I went out and I did something in the professional sphere, that I kept a spreadsheet. I logged the date, the time, how it tied to my organizational objectives. And I would literally print out a spreadsheet and hand it to my supervisor every time he had to evaluate me, because here, I'm tracking every single thing I'm doing for you. And I have it in a format that's accessible. So there's no doubt that when you go to evaluate me, you have the data. And it's in a form that you said during my evaluation that you wanted to receive it in. And so I think that there's a lot of power in getting to that point. But also for me, I love when people talk to me and they're consistently surprised by where I've been, or what I know, or how I move, or how I'm able to run a company, for the last 7 years without any outside capital raised. I love those conversations, but all of that came from spending a good part of my early career trying to understand how others felt who were much different than I.
So I'm going to stay with you here on this. Your mentors, did you end up finding mentors who were Black, or did you find mentors who didn't look like you, who were able to be helpful? What were your first set of mentors like?
Yeah, and so it's really interesting that you asked this question. So two of the mentors that I actively cultivated a relationship with when I was in my early 20s were both pushing mid to late 60s. Hopefully they're not seeing this because they're going to tell me they were younger, right? But they're pushing mid to late 60s at the time. And one was an African-American male educated at Tuskegee University, was really groundbreaking in the area of small satellites for biological test purposes. And the other gentleman, you know, he came out of a military background. He was an older Caucasian male who was running the engineering division at the time. And I spent equal parts of effort getting to know both of them. And I would say they're really still mentors to me to this day, but I love what Monica was saying about it's a two-way street. I highly recommend that you put as much energy into your mentor relationship, if not more in some cases than the mentor is putting into you, and understand that people are busy and life happens, but that these individuals really can be leveraged throughout your career in so many ways, whether it be in your professional or even in your personal life.
So Monica, you said that, I'm going to pick back up on this. You talked about this beneficial relationship you have both ways. And I've found a bunch of different ways that people find benefit from both being a mentor and being mentored. Talk about the difference between being beneficial and being transactional. Is that a concern?
Sure. I mean, again, I think you need to know your end goal and your objective. For me, spending time in this space and building mentors and sponsors was really, it's a part of my own growth and development, as well as a vehicle that I use throughout my entire career to open doors. And so there's a young lady who recently called me and asked me to be her mentor. Now, she has her own business that has legal technology that she clearly could have come to me and said, I want you to look at this technology and to see if Coca-Cola would be interested in using it. There was an obvious connection, and I was certain that's what she was going to lead with. We spent 2 hours on a call. Most of her questions were about me, my career, how I got to where I am, a little bit about her and who she is, you know, our interests, our hobbies, our likes and dislikes, how we're dealing with the social justice issues. And we didn't talk at all about her company. I tried to bring it up 3 times. And she said, I'm not ready to talk to you about that yet because I don't want you to think that's the reason why I'm reaching out to you. And I just thought it was a perfect example of being intentional about reaching out to me. I know why she's reaching out to me, but also being very intentional about building the relationship so that it's lasting and it's not transactional. We will continue to talk. She sent me a resume of one of her Spelman sisters for a nanny because she knows that I'm struggling with the parenting. I mean, the relationship is beyond what I can do for her. And, but she is top of mind for me as I'm thinking about ways that we can connect on a professional level as well, and ways that I can support her. So that's just a good example that just happened very recently. And I think just knowing your objective and making sure you're working on that front end to build the relationship before you get into the end goal is important.
Sherry, I want to stay on this for a second because I do think, you know, as people are starting their careers out and they're hearing all this, Shaka talked about, you know, young people who, you know, come in and they want to challenge, you know, and keep it real and do themselves. You know, I have found that you have to, for instance, when I spoke up to my big boss, as I call him, when I spoke up to my boss and critiqued him, it was on something that I had some pretty good grounding on. I mean, I didn't feel like I wasn't just freewheeling it, and I was trying to give him concrete examples and lay it out. I think that the danger or the challenge can be if you're just kind of throwing stuff out there and expecting a return on something where you haven't really done, you know, the work maybe to have enough expertise to give the critique that it is you're trying to give to the organization. tell me how you evaluate kind of these things about keeping it real, as we've sort of talked about it, and then having these mentor relationships that aren't just, again, they're not transactional. They're beneficial in kind of a longer term sense.
That's so important, and it's really a difficult balance that we try to strike. I would say that I've been at GM about 5 years, and what I've tried to do is really build out a network, leveraging our employee resource groups and key women's groups in particular, to make sure that I have people kind of at different levels within the company, some that are junior than me, some that are on par with me, and then obviously senior, who can provide me counsel so that I have a sounding board. There are conversations that I will have with key mentors and advocates of mine to just release, because I have found that I need to do that during these times. And so I will have private conversations that I know I can never share elsewhere. But it's the fact that we are going through this together that helps me deal with that, whatever that challenge may be. And then there's those times where I know that I need to position myself to speak to someone like a big boss. And that's where it gets a bit nuanced, and where I'm always about the, let's have a one-on-one conversation. I would say that these platforms right now don't allow us to really say the truths that we probably want to share amongst each other. But I will say that we, need to strategically prepare, because you cannot assume that your big boss understands the weight on your shoulders, or the experiences that maybe you have had over the course of several years within a company or within your organization that have impacted your view. And so you might take that history of experiences, and it may seem that it's just suddenly spilling out in one concerted moment. But really, it's the fact that you were dealing with these things over and over. So I think it's trying to figure out how to frame things strategically for those big bosses, and leveraging the people that are in your toolkit who you can have as a sounding board first, and then finding out, what's worth it. How do you strategically pick your battles at the end of the day?
Chloe, can we talk a little bit about, you tell me how you feel about this. I call it the myth of the meritocracy. But how do you see merit? I mean, I think we often think, I thought beginning of my career, I thought I just had to be the smartest, I had to show up the most on time, I had to do the most work, I had to volunteer for the most assignments. I just had to be like the most at it dude in order to get, opportunities. And then I would watch these jokers get opportunities who were not doing half of the things that I was doing. And so I realized that there probably, there needed to be a little bit more of a blend. So I don't know, how does that work out for you, and how do you advise people about merit and skill and the focus on them in your career?
It's interesting because I have a West Indian background, and so I always was raised thinking you have to work multiple jobs, you have to be the hardest working. When you come in, you got to make sure that you work longer than anybody else and work harder than anybody else because you're Black. And I would say that I think it is a myth in that it's about working smarter, not always working harder. And sometimes we lose track of that. And so this is back to that whole pie equation. So it depends on different points in your career. And when you're starting out in your career, you've got to develop that baseline of hard work, just like you're starting out in school. Once you develop that baseline, you can get better and better, because people know that you try hard, you work hard, you get good grades. At work, it's the same thing. You develop that foundation, those foundational skills, and that's a necessary baseline. But besides that, it's how you show up. And those are the things, the unwritten rules, as you say, that people didn't really spend a lot of time telling me. So I thought if I'm working all the time, that just means I'm working hard and I'm going to get promoted. And I realized when I didn't get that first promotion that that's not all it takes. And it takes more than that. And that's where that image piece comes in. It's how do you show up? Do you show up excited and ready to go to work? Are you positive? Are people comfortable being around you? Are they comfortable having conversations with you? Or are you just disappearing after work like I used to do and just going to do what I thought was fun? Or is work really something that you're part of, and can you have fun at work? And the more you show up and the more you're positive, the more opportunities come to you. And then that last exposure piece, you know, that beats some of it. So Harvey Coleman would say, he, again, my mentor, that, you know, as you get at the latter points of your career, performance is just 10%. And then image is only 30%. And then exposure is at 60%. And that's all about who you know and who you're spending time with. And not only that, but who knows you. So when you're not in the room, who can talk about it and say, this is what Chloe wants, and this is what's important to Chloe. And I would just say one thing, if I can, about, you know, these times are great times to be a young Black professional. Many companies are thinking about, you know, how do we fight systematic injustice? I know Accenture is. And so we're looking at diversity across the board. And we're looking at what are some other pathways that we can put in place to give more people opportunities. We have an apprenticeship program. So people come to us not always with a college degree, but sometimes through other pathways. And so we're looking to help people get those skills and experiences. And it's not just Accenture, but many companies are. And so I would be excited if I were young Black professional. I'm excited now, but, you know, for all of you, stay excited, because there are opportunities for you, and we're looking for people like you.
All right, Shaka, the meritocracy, is it real? Does the cream rise to the top?
Look, listen, as a Black professional, you know, all of us have grown up with various iterations of, you have to work twice as hard, you know, to be able to meet with, you know, with similar results, et cetera, et cetera. That remains true somewhat. I do think that there is an importance in understanding your worth. You have value to an organization. That's part of the reason why they bring you in, to be part of their organization. Understanding what your unique value proposition is can be challenging. I remember a long time ago, I've got kids of all ages, but my 19-year-old was doing a program with a group of South Asian students, and they were supposed to come up with business ideas, Shark Tank style, and pitch their ideas and bring them to fruition, et cetera. And he got frustrated because he was coming up with great ideas, but a lot of the other kids weren't as interested in what he wanted to do as what they were in what they wanted to do. His ideas were mainly focused around culture. And I said, listen, you never underestimate the value of culture. Don't underestimate that. What I try to do when I build my teams is build a diverse culture where you have a diverse set of voices, where you are hearing from multiple audiences who have multiple viewpoints about an issue, because that's what makes you better as an organization, is being able to look at things through multiple lenses and have the benefit of those that multitude of experiences to help to drive you towards a decision point. So back to meritocracy. How does that fit within the construct of a meritocracy? Again, there are metrics that are used to determine who's putting points on the board. Understand what those metrics are and be willing to do the work to figure out how to put those points on the board. I'm going to say something that may not seem fair, but it's true. You can't do the same things that your white colleagues do. You don't get to roll out and leave when they leave. You don't get to show up late like you don't get to do those things. You need to understand the value of being in the room as much as possible for as long as possible, so that you can absorb it and learn as much as possible, so that you can internalize it and hopefully process it through your own evaluation process and come back to the table with how you're going to provide value. And that can be difficult. And that's part of what mentors are for. I love what Cherie presented in terms of how you build your team. You need a team. That team needs to include people who do not necessarily look like you. It needs to include your colleagues and peers. You'll have a peer group that you start in the work world with that you'll need to lean on. It will need to include people who look like you. You'll have people who you went to college with. You'll have other young Black professionals who you build relationships with. Being able to bounce thoughts, ideas, concepts, challenges, opportunities off of that network of people that you build is what helps to inform your decision making, so that you are best equipped to be able to take advantage of what is supposed to be a meritocracy. Even in this Black Lives Matter movement era, one of the challenges that I have is I run the Washington office for one of my clients. And, they're talking about it, and they're talking about allyship and how to be better allies and all of that kind of stuff. And scheduling meetings to meet with senior executives, because it's a great idea to meet with senior executives to tell them what it is you think. And I had to stop them at one point and say to them, it is the height of white privilege to think that you can hijack all of the Black employees' day to have them explain to you what they think about being Black in America. They still have to go back to work. Oh, we didn't think about it that way. I had to come back and think about some new ways of going about it. So my point in this exercise is the meritocracy is a thing, but you have to understand what it is, build a diverse set of individuals to bounce things off of, to position yourself to best take advantage of what is considered to be a meritocracy, but you just have to go about it a different path.
Monica, when I was early in my career, somebody said to me, one of my mentors said to me, you don't realize this, but I was my, mid-20s, but the people that you are friends with today and hanging out with today are going to be the people who hire you or give you business or answer questions for you when you're in your 40s. You're in your 20s now, y'all are hanging out and having cocktails. But when you're in your 30s and 40s, they're going to be the people who you do business with, and it matters. Can you talk a little bit about peer mentoring and relationships and how you manage those professional peer relationships?
Yeah, I think we all can look back to our 20s and think about things we might have done differently. When I think about the amount of time I spent with people who look like me and who have the same interests as me versus building out that diverse group of friends, I sometimes could kick myself, because those are the people who are sitting in the CEO chairs. They are the people who, are running these corporations. But I think, there is a balance. I think the way that I look at it now and what I tell my children is that wherever you are, you want to reach as far as wide as you can, so that you're meeting people and you can grow yourself. You want to keep out the toxicity, but you want to make sure that you're broadening your mind and opening your channels and making sure that where you are, you're making the most of it. I just want to talk about the meritocracy question because I think it's something I talk about often through this one example. I think when I first became a leader and was in the boardroom when we were making people decisions and talent decisions for the first time, I was shocked. I was shocked at the lack of depth of conversation. I was shocked at the way we talked about people, the way we didn't talk about people. And the conclusion I came to is that the decisions are already made based on the relationships people have before you get into that room. So when some of my mentees would come up to me afterwards and say, so what did they say about me in the talent session? They didn't talk about you at all. And I think these are the things that people need to know, that if you don't have someone advocating for you or sponsoring you or telling you or speaking your name, you're not getting talked about. And that was a lesson for me. I think something that I didn't know. You think that your work shows up on its own, and it doesn't. There's a vehicle that it needs to get there. And I think a lot of times that's through sponsorship. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, when you talk about your peers, even as a new leader, I went to my first leadership dinner, social event. I'm the only African American, but I'm one of 6 females at the dinner. The dinner ends and all of the women grab their bags, say their goodbyes, and the men stay seated. And I was like, what's going on? And the guy next to me says, oh, you can go if you need to, but we're going to go to the watering hole and have some cleansing ales. I don't know what that means, but I'm going wherever you're going. So all the women left and I stayed, and the amount of conversation, the decisions that were made in those next 2 hours at the watering hole over beer played out in the talent decisions. They'd already been made. And so I think what I learned from that is you have to be present in places where you don't want to be. You have to get involved with people who are different than you. You have to make sure that you are in those circles that matter. And I think that's the only way that you're assured that you have a seat at the table.
There is almost nothing more important in that conversation about being remembered in my career. I think that people going out to have a beer with those guys from time to time, I have heard people come back and say, oh yeah, Jamal, he's a good guy. He had a drink with us last week. I mean, that was it. That was the extent of our relationship. I went and had a cocktail with some people. They're like, oh yeah, we got to recommend somebody to do this opportunity. Let's call Jamal. He's a good guy. He had a drink with us. Okay. So don't, manage that, right? Like you got to manage those interactions, but don't be afraid of them. Cherie, how does that fit? How does that fit with your experience in terms of the informality of the relationships, both with the people that you're, working for, but also, the peers and developing, because you don't know who's going to end up where. So your friends are going to be your friends, but it is often surprising, now that I look back over, 20 years, it's surprising to see people who when I was 25, I went and had a beer with, and now we reconnect, 20 years later, and, they're doing something really interesting and I'm doing something that they find interesting. And now they're like, well, why don't you come in and let's have a conversation about that? I mean, I got a lot of business when I was a consultant from people who I just knew socially.
It's so true. One bit of advice that I heard from a career coach was your network is your net worth. And that has resonated with me ever since I heard those words, because as you point out, your friends are the folks, your friends now are the folks that 10, 20 years later, if you are surrounding yourself with people that you, admire and that are going in the right direction, they will then be those folks that are running offices, that are leading companies that can support you. And I will say, even if they're not yet in those spaces, they may be connected to people that are in those spaces. And I've literally experienced that as a result of having an expanded network where I was, stepping out of my comfort zone and building relationships with women more broadly that weren't just African American. But some of these women thought of me for opportunities that, I would have never otherwise been exposed to. And so having that broad exposure and that broad base of relationships really, really, really makes a difference. The other thing that I wanted to touch on, and Shaka made me think about this in his commentary about, knowing your worth and your value. We are all struggling with imposter syndrome. And I realized when I heard that term that that's what has, caused the nervousness sometimes in the back of my throat, or has made me question, when I show up. But I am taking those steps to really make sure that I'm aligning my vision and my values, and that I am trying to show up intentionally in ways that will help others. But it's so hard because we have to deal with that, and we have to acknowledge that it is a legitimate phenomenon that has caused us and continues to cause us to not necessarily take those opportunities where we don't fit all the criteria, but it's worth it to try, right? It kind of, you end up holding yourself back when you don't do that. And then the other piece that I just wanted to briefly reflect on is kind of in that same vein, in terms of the challenges that we're dealing with right now, and companies are all looking to their Black employees to be experts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We still have to do our 9 to 5, and in some roles, you are literally working 24 hours, but you're still expected to fit time into your schedule to not only complete your day-to-day task, but you've got to be now a DE&I expert. And that can be an opportunity. It can be an opportunity to step into a new role, or it can take away from what you're currently working on. And so how do you balance that so that you're meeting your objectives, but you're still being true to yourself to step up and show up in those spaces where you might have the opportunity to facilitate change within your organization? So we have these challenges that I think our white colleagues don't have. And so it's a bit of a struggle, but I think it's all a balancing act at the end of the day.
Well, and I'm going to step into something that I think there are at least 3 people here who could probably speak on better than I can, but I've seen it, which is that it's often sometimes easier for men to do that than it is for women, especially as you get older and you have childcare responsibilities. So I think thinking about how you structure your personal life to be able to have some ability to be in those spaces, even when you have personal responsibilities, I imagine it's going to be a big thing for people to manage as they move in their careers. And if anybody else wants to get into that, please do. So let me ask you, Monica, did I see you get out? Let me ask y'all this question. Has anybody here ever been rejected by a mentor? Somebody you wanted to mentor you and they were like, yeah, they just didn't return the call or didn't follow up or didn't set the meeting or?
Yeah, I've always approached mentorship from an organic standpoint. If it fits, it fits. I've seen companies do the the mentor match type of deal. Sometimes it works and clicks, and oftentimes it doesn't. I would put it less in terms when I view mentorship. I don't view it through the formal lens. This is my truth. It's not necessarily going to be true for everybody. But if you find people whose work you admire, or whose career paths you admire, or whose approach just seems to make sense to you, and you can build conversation space and opportunities to dialogue with those folks, then those are mentors. A lot of my mentors I've never met in my life, because I've read about them. There is something to be said for studying successful executives, particularly successful Black executives, and what their career pathing processes look like. You don't have to know those people to know their experience and be able to build off of, what their career path looked like and how that might mirror your own. On the same turn, there are folks who you can build off of who are your peer group who can also be mentors. Jamal and I bounce things off of each other and talk about issue areas that we might not be as well versed in, or about an experience with a potential or existing client, or whatever the case may be. Your own personal network can be mentors as well. There's no one cookie cutter approach to mentorship. I find sometimes, somebody earlier said, you have to be, as a matter of fact, if not more matter of fact, about pursuing mentors as they do about being responsive to you. And the reality is, you're going to reach out to people and they're not going to get back to you sometimes, a lot of times. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I tell people all the time, charge it to my head and not to my heart. I just can't, do everything well all the time. But you pick up the bits and pieces along the way, and you make it fit into the puzzle that provides you with a career path that makes sense for you.
Anybody else ever had a negative experience with a mentor and had to navigate how to get out of it, or it felt like it didn't really work the way you wanted it to?
I did. When I was younger in my career, a senior female partner was someone that, I wanted to become a partner at the company I'm with, Accenture. And I asked her if she would mentor me, and she told me, no, I'm too busy. And I mean, I just, it stuck with me because that's not our core values. Our core values are stewardship and integrity and, helping the individuals. And so it really hurt my feelings, and I had to get past that. And so what I've learned is that you're going to hear a lot of no's in life. I know, guys, you probably hear it more than we do, but there's no throughout your life. So, you develop that resilience. And through that resilience, you get better at being able to succeed in life. And so at this point, I've heard so many no's, but I realized that if somebody tells me no, someone else will tell me yes. And I think that's the most important takeaway, is if somebody tells you no, keep going, because it's all about your goals and what's important to you. And really, for me, it's my faith as well. And so I know that what God has for me is for me. And so if one person can't give me the information that I need, I'm going to keep going and find somebody else. And that's what I would say is, a lot of times we get stuck with the voices in our head that tell us, they told you no. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? Maybe I didn't ask right. Maybe, stop listening to those voices in your head. Get out of your head and just keep moving.
Yeah. Okay, I want to just circle up with some final thoughts about advice, and you can, however it is you want to frame it, but if you might want to touch on some advice about how in this time period, people should be taking advantage of the space or the distance, the technology, what's good for them to be a mentor, I guess, for a second. How would you advise people to take advantage of this period where things are in such flux? I'll start with you, Monica, and then we'll kind of counterclockwise it.
Sure. I would ground it all in saying something that I was told at a very young age, wherever you're trying to go, find somebody who's already been there. And I would spend this time finding people who have achieved what it is that you're looking to achieve, whether it be from a professional standpoint, may it be from a civic standpoint, but find those people and find a connection point virtually that you can make. So like I said, I was given that advice early on to find my first job by just reaching out to someone and pinging them and saying, hey, I see that you grew up in St. Louis. So did I. What do you think about these redlining practices? Can we sit and have coffee about it? Or, hey, I see you're an AKA. So am I. Do you think we can connect and talk about your career and how you got to where you are? Be your true, authentic self, but utilize this time where people are spending their days and nights in front of their computer to make those connections. All of your hits won't land, but some of them will, and they may be the most valuable relationships that that you make going through this crisis. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to the AKAs and the Howard alums who had not rubbed our faces in the fact that the first Black woman to be a VP candidate comes from your ranks, but we will give you all, the due you deserve. Shaka. Shaka, what's your thought?
I wasn't going to mention that at all, but I thank you for doing that, brother.
Well, my wife is a Howard graduate, so I've been living through it. I've been living through it.
Just to name one of your children Sundiata, so I appreciate that too. Listen, this is a tough time. This is a tough time for the work world in general. It really is. It may the workplace environment may look dramatically different when we get back to a regular cadence of work. I said earlier that the millennials and Gen Zers are far better equipped for this moment in time than those who precede them, because technology is such an important tool in this day and age. I think being able to leverage the network that you have and keep those folks that you have close is important. I think using this time to focus on the learn phase of your career. The way one of my mentors explained it to me is that there are 3 phases to your career. There's the learn phase, where you're figuring out what it is that you do for a living. There's the earn phase, where your income potential is going to grow at a rapid clip. And there's a return phase where you teach and train, the next generation to come along behind you. Those phases are not exclusive. They run together. Sometimes you're in your learn and earn phase at the same time. Sometimes you're in your learn and return phase at the same time. It just depends on the cadence at that moment. Right now, though, because we are socially distanced, I would say take advantage as much as possible of your learn phase. If you're in a company that's got a training module set up or some portal that you can go to read about, read everything. Understand everything. Don't think, wow, I finally got off my last Zoom call at 4:30. Now I'm gonna go kick it. Use the time productively to build your skill set so that you are building your base of knowledge, because as we start to either get to a new normal with Zoom being and other platforms being the way that we work together, or as we transition back into the world when outside opens up, like I like to say it, what you did with this time, what you did during this period is gonna matter, and it's gonna show. So take advantage of this downtime. Really focus on learning. Pick up some literature in your area of focus or expertise. Some folks have mentioned some books during this conversation. There are a number of resources that you can draw from to just try to better understand what your place in the work world is going to be, and how it is that you want to leverage towards being successful in your career. This is a period of time, and ultimately, hopefully we'll all be able to look back on this period and either laugh or be like, oh, remember when outside was closed for like a year? But it is a phase. It is not the final endpoint for your career. So, utilize this phase in time productively.
All right, Chloe.
I'd say three things. Similar to what Shaka said, the learn phase is important. I'm usually in all three phases at the same time, but the learn phase right now during this time, there are a lot of free Zoom calls that are going on, lots of conferences that are usually paid conferences, and now I can attend for free. So I'm signing up for most of those Zoom calls because that's how I'm building my network. And you know how you have that little, my daughter, my kids teach me, there's that little feature, that little chat feature where you can chat with someone privately. I'll do that when I'm on the Zoom calls. Hey, I love what you said. Can we talk after, or can I connect with you? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I keep it moving. If it doesn't, I just keep going. So this actually, and I learned this from my 10-year-old, she said to me, Chloe, Mommy, can you give me 15 minutes a day, focus time? Just 15 minutes, because you're always doing so much. You're always so busy. And I'm like, come on, girl, I'll give you more than that all the time. And what I realized is I really don't. So it's that 15 focus minutes that you get with someone when you schedule a Zoom call. To me, you can build that authentic dialogue and talk about what's important to you and get to know them. And you can be more authentic and more real with someone than you can be at a cocktail party where people are having a drink and looking around and trying to figure out what they're up to. So this is actually a great time to build authentic relationships. So just try it. And don't be one of those people that says, oh, will you be my mentor? And then don't reach out afterwards. Yeah. Stay in touch and do those follow-ups.
When I was in grad school, they used to advise us to try to have lunch or coffee or drink with one new person every week. I never did it every week, but I did try to do it. I probably did it once a month. And I would say I ended up with some pretty decent, relationships just with that kind of thinking. And I, try to keep it up internally when I work in an organization. It's just to try to meet somebody, at least at their desk, and figure out what it is they do. What do you do here? Just so at least my internal network works. But online in the Zoom world, it seems like it makes a lot of sense too. Cherie?
Wow, I was taking notes on all of the commentary. I think that was so insightful. I wish I could just ditto everything. But what I will say is just a few points to leave with you all is, identify your passion. Take the time now where things are relatively quiet to figure out what it is that drives you and identify the values that you have and how you can ultimately align your values and your passion. And do not feel that your current role is going to limit you in terms of achieving alignment. Think about your sphere of influence. So you might be in a junior role. That doesn't mean that you can't be a leader. And it doesn't mean that you can't leverage the relationships that you have or the people that you know throughout your organization to affect change or to bring about a change more specifically in terms of the work that you do. So if you feel that you're in a space now that isn't aligned with where you want to be, try to pull those levers and try to identify people both internally and externally, depending on, whether or not you are employed right now. You might be looking for work and trying to figure out where to start and seeing that there is very limited opportunity right now. And so I would echo the comments about identifying people that you're seeing on these webinars and at these different conferences that are now virtual, and seeking them out and sending them messages, especially leveraging LinkedIn to identify your immediate network and the people that are adjacent to that network and their contacts. And if they align with your vision, your values, your passion, just reach out, send them a note, and be intentional and stay in touch to those that respond to you. But the very final thing that I would say is that I am an older millennial who has kids, and that comment about that Chloe mentioned about just give me 10 minutes. I really need to be more intentional myself. And so I think I appreciate hearing you say that, Chloe, because I know my 8-year-old daughter is always vying for my time and asking me to do things with her. And I feel right now that even though things have slowed down for many, it hasn't for me. And so I'm trying to find that time. But I would say slow down, find the time, and be intentional.
All right, thanks everybody. I guess I'm going to close out with this. sometimes we talked about this, these different kinds of relationships. And I think you should think about when you're going in to look for a mentor, that those relationships will show up in different ways, because there are some people who, you know, older people in particular, I've gone to see, they sat down and gave me a lunch. We spent an hour and a half together, and then we didn't really talk again. Like that was really the end of our session. But they've referred business to me, or they've referred other people to me who are looking for a mentor. Oh, you should go see Jamal, and they've sent them to me. And then if I need something, the phone call, the door is open for me to call and get help. But it's not like we're, you know, doing this once a week or once a month or whatever. It's just kind of, you know, we have an existing rapport. So some people are going to be more present and they're going to be there all the time, and some people are going to be more distant. But that doesn't mean that because you haven't heard from them or haven't talked to them, that they no longer exist in your circle of folks that you can rely on. So I do want people to, and sometimes with older people, they really do just want to talk, right? Like they've done all this stuff in their lives. Their family members don't care, right? So if you want to come and listen to me tell stories about what I did to get here, I'm happy to spend some time doing that. And I found that's a good way to build this stuff up. So I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for having us. This is hopefully useful to everybody, and everybody stay safe and stay healthy and stay engaged. See you next time.